The Writer's Stage, Lesson 11, Virtues and Appeals. The age of the soldier calls us to apply our writing to the commitments of our lives. Childhood is naturally observant. Adolescence is naturally full of passion. Making use of these observations and passions is the challenge. As soldiers, we do that by allowing the 4 virtues to govern our writing and by using the 3 appeals wisely. And we will learn about both of them in this lesson. Traditionally, there are 4 cardinal or natural virtues that govern the passions. Those virtues are temperance, prudence, fortitude, and justice. While we may not talk about them as much anymore as perhaps we should, we can still see them depicted in writing and in art, as you can see in the pictures in these slides, like this sculpture found on the Strasbourg Cathedral. If you remember, we spoke of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle in the intro to this unit. Plato was Socrates' student. Plato also wrote The Republic, a multi-volume work which chronicles Socrates' teaching. In Book 4, Socrates describes his vision of a perfect city. He concludes that that perfect city would be wise, courageous, moderate, and just, hence the 4 virtues. The virtues are an essential element of discussions of morality, but the virtues are also habits which maturing writers should cultivate. Keep in mind, defining moral good goes beyond the scope of rhetoric, and certainly beyond the scope of this course. Nonetheless, as a maturing writer, you must be bringing a maturing sense of goodness to your writing. Let's define each one. Prudence is wisdom. Prudence is the habit of choosing a course of action that will most likely produce our true happiness. This requires us to see clearly. We don't want to deceive ourselves by seeing only what we want to see. And just seeing doesn't do much good if we don't then choose the best path to take. How does this apply to writing? As a prudent writer, you must observe your subjects closely, recognizing how your emotions may affect your perceptions. In short, prudent people don't just see. Once they see the whole picture, they act. Next is temperance and fortitude. The virtues of temperance and fortitude balance each other while governing our actions. Temperance is moderation, and fortitude is courage. Temperance keeps a person from being too rash or too foolhardy. In writing, wild statements that claim more than can be supported or proven can make the writer seem arrogant or foolhardy. Temperance keeps it in check. Conversely, fortitude governs the timid. Fortitude encourages a person from being too cautious. In writing, if you temper every other sentence with, "in my opinion," or "I think," you may sound as if you lack conviction. Fortitude encourages the strength of conviction. Both temperance and fortitude are essential in rhetoric. Finally, justice is the 4th cardinal virtue. The habit of justice causes the writer to treat a subject fairly. Writers who treat their subjects justly do not incite panic over minor incidents, and they don't gloss over serious problems. So good writers will always check those virtues, particularly when persuading an audience to take up a cause. Some questions you might ask as you read each other's proposals might be, do they see the whole picture? Are they choosing a course of action rather than complaining about an issue? Is that action bold but not too foolhardy? And are the writers being extreme in their position? Moving on to the 3 appeals. Rhetoricians since Socrates' time have tried to understand how best to appeal to an audience. They focus their efforts on three types of appeals: ethical, logical, and emotional. The goal of your writing assignment is not to win an argument. It's to persuade the audience to act a certain way. I think people often confuse argument and persuasion. Winning an argument often results in angering or alienating, or at worst, humiliating your audience. The goal of persuasion, however, is to win support. You want your audience to adopt your position ultimately. You're trying to win an ally to achieve acceptance or understanding. If you offend or alienate your audience, you'll not have accomplished the purpose of this assignment, even if you technically did win that argument. Clearly, persuasion's not an easy task. So how do you do it effectively? Let's look at the first type of appeal. I started with ethical appeal because it's the most frequently misunderstood. Be sure and note that in the study of rhetoric, this term has a very different meaning from what we would use in daily conversation. So when you think of ethical appeal, I want you to think of Abraham Lincoln. I want you to think of credibility and trustworthiness. We must demonstrate to our audience our credibility. And we also must demonstrate that we can be trusted, that we're knowledgeable enough about the issue that we've selected. So how do you do that? You sound like an expert, first of all. You use your experience to support your assertions. And you use outside experts and research in addition to support your assertions. I had a student who wrote an essay about improving a park in her city. She lived in Lawrence. The fact that she told me that she lived nearby, that her children played at the park, added to the credibility of her proposal. Her vast experience interacting with and observing the happenings in the park further supported her proposal. She had ethos. That essay had ethical appeal. The second appeal is logical appeal, or logos. We can appeal to our audience in terms of the reason or logic. And we can even appeal to the audience in terms of just plain old common sense. How do you do that in writing? You need to sound rational, and you absolutely cannot be too extreme. Finally, you need to support your arguments with facts and research. And here is where the additional lesson in Unit 3 will come in. You're going to be learning how to paraphrase. Paraphrasing is most effectively done when you use facts and statistics and you put them into your own words. Those facts and statistics, as you can see, will go far in supporting your proposal and your argument. Finally is emotional appeal, or pathos. We can appeal to the emotions of an audience, obviously, by touching the heart. You may think about ads that you've seen on television or seen in print. Those ads generally appeal more to the emotions than to anything else. They are not seeking to touch the mind of the consumer, but the heart. How do you create pathos? You describe with vivid detail. Bringing a scene to life helps the reader to visualize it and helps the reader to really feel what's happening in that scene. Use examples of individuals. Think about some of those advertisements for charities that we see on television. They always have an individual there. They have a personal story. They show that person. It helps for us to know that person and to relate to that person, and it touches our heart. It reaches the reader where he or she may be vulnerable. But obviously, and hopefully, you're thinking about this and thinking in terms of ethos and logos. Pathos can be in contradiction with those other appeals. So as a caution, you want to make sure you don't go overboard on the emotional appeal side. You don't want to make a big deal out of a little bit of spilled chocolate milk. In classic, so we're going to practice recognizing appeals in Media with Journal 11. And then in your pre-writing folder, you're going to brainstorm ways to test your proposal based on these 4 virtues.